What's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be upgrading the clutch slave cylinder in the Ducati Street Fighter. So I have an Oberon clutch slave cylinder here. This one is a 1mm step up from the factory slave cylinder. And I actually bought that because I thought my factory slave cylinder was leaking. I had a leak in the system and I couldn't find where the leak was. I didn't see it tracing out the line. After enough time went by with me not changing out the slave cylinder, I started to see where the leak was in the line because the brake fluid that was leaking out spent more time on the paint, so it made it evident where it was leaking from. So I've changed out the line now, so that's not an issue anymore, but I have the slave cylinder and I'm going to change it out. The reason I'm going to the 29mm versus the 28mm is really because it's an upgrade, but while I was reading about it, it's supposed to make finding neutral a little bit easier. That's not an issue with this bike. This runs perfectly fine. I'm just changing it out because I bought the part thinking that I had a leaking slave cylinder, and now I have it. But also, after I bought that, I kind of went on a little purchase binge, and then I bought this also. So this is the Brembo RCS 16 ratio click system clutch lever, and I bought the RCS 19 clutch lever. I think it's the RCS 19. It's the larger one because I believe this brake master cylinder is 18. And I do have an issue with this brake master cylinder slowly leaking air over time. That's something that the dealership told me about when I went there for one of my first safety inspections. They said that these bikes, after it sits for a couple months without riding, you have to bleed the brake system. Somehow air gets in the line. I don't know, that's what they said. And I've actually seen that while I've had this bike. So it's something they told me before I started having the issue with this bike, and then it's something that I noticed as I would let the bike sit. I have to bleed the brakes. I don't know why. But right now I'm going to change the clutch slave cylinder, and then in a video coming up I will be changing my brake master and clutch master cylinder so that I can have a nice matching brake and clutch set and then two working levers. But getting into this is actually going to be very easy. It's probably going to take me like 10 minutes to do it. First, I'm going to be loosening up the banjo fitting, just loosening it, not taking it out so that it leaks fluid. I'm just going to be loosening it. That way it'll be easy to loosen later on whenever I have the slave cylinder off of the motorcycle. Then I'll be loosening up the 3 bolts that go into the slave cylinder. They're 5mm hex head, so they take a 5mm hex or Allen key to loosen those, and I'll be using that with this because all I have is, I don't have the extended Allen key sockets. I just have the normal L-shaped socket. So I'm going to put this on the short end of the L so that I'll have leverage to turn it. It's going into aluminum case, so I don't want to over tighten it, so I'm going to tighten it with a shorter extension whenever I go to put it back in. And then I'll bolt everything up, and using the reverse bleeding technique, push fluid up through the brake line up into the master cylinder and the reservoir. So if you don't know what the reverse bleeding technique is, I explained that more in the video where I changed out the steel braided line that's on this, and it came with a steel braided line, so I changed the factory steel braided line for this steel braided line. I explained that more in that other video, why I'm using that reverse bleeding technique. So it's extremely easy. You basically just push fluid up from the bottom and you're ready to ride. There's no bleeding at all. There's no opening up the bleed screw and closing up the bleed screw and getting brake fluid spraying on your paint and all of that stuff. It's also really easy to do by yourself if you're doing it on a car. Check that out if you want to. So I'm going to go right into this, and yeah, let's begin changing out my slave cylinder. Getting this off is pretty easy. This main bleed screw is 12mm on the bottom and 8mm on top. But right now I'm just loosening this. So just crack it loose a little bit, just so that it's easier to loosen up later. Also, whenever you get the slave cylinder out, absolutely do not press your clutch lever. It'll blow the piston out of the bottom. Another thing with these Ducati slave cylinders, so at least this motorcycle specifically, I know that there's a push rod retainer that is needed for this factory slave cylinder, but it's apparently not needed for the Oberon. So I'm not going to be using that retainer whenever I put this back in. It's been on there for 9 years. It's a little stuck. So basically what I'm doing is I have the screwdriver in one of these little screw holes, and I'm prying against the body of this slave cylinder so that I can pull it and slide it out. So I'm going to get my slave cylinder ready to go on as soon as I loosen that one. I don't want to lose a bunch of fluid. Right now the system is sealed up, so it shouldn't leak very much fluid out, but you don't want to just leave it open. All right, here we go. So this is full. It took a lot of fluid actually. So yeah, this is full. This is ready pretty much to go on. I'm going to slide this one in place. Okay. I am reusing this washer. You should change this washer because that's just what you should do. I'm reusing this because this is pretty much brand new. I just put this line on not too long ago at all. So like that. Kind of tight. I can't crank on it right now because it's not bolted into the engine case. Now the instructions did say that if you're doing this on a Ducati that has, what was it, less than a 33 millimeter push rod surface that's sticking out of the case, then you can use this little dowel pin looking thing, the little spacer that came in the thing that I thought was a dowel pin. Tightening it up evenly. I don't want one to be too tight, and yeah. Now this is where, if you have a torque wrench on an Allen with a long Allen key, this is very beneficial. But what I'm doing is I'm just putting my hand down here and barely tightening it. I'm not going to use the full length of this 1 foot extension that I have in my hand. Now I can tighten this screw up. Yeah, okay. So that's pretty much ready. This is like in the fish tank section of most pet stores or Walmart or Target or whatever. Just a basic syringe. If you are doing this and you're not watching my other video and you're trying to follow what I'm doing, then after you use this syringe like this, you have to wash the rubber seal off. You can't leave fluid on it. Okay, so I have to open up the top bleed screw. I have a hose that's like this one on the upper bleed screw, so that as I push fluid up, it doesn't go out and go everywhere. It just pretty much stays in that hose. Get that loose, fluid starts flowing. And then basically I'm just watching the other, make sure all air bubbles come out of the other bleed screw, closing the upper bleed screw, and closing this bleed screw. And that's it. Actually, I put way too much fluid in this. It doesn't need this much fluid. Now, get a cup of water and then wash off all of these parts that you got brake fluid on, because you do not want brake fluid to stay on any of these parts. This is anodized black, so it shouldn't hurt that. But if brake fluid stays on any of this paint, it's going to eat the paint. That's what brake fluid does. And it looks like I'm going to have to do the traditional technique of pumping, squeezing, releasing, pumping, squeezing, releasing. I think there's air trapped, even though I poured fluid into the Oberon slave cylinder. I think there's air trapped somewhere. This is just going to catch the fluid so it doesn't make a mess. All right, I had to pump the lever a few times while I was pushing fluid in from the bottom. That way it got whatever air bubbles out of the system. I think it was just air bubbles that were down here, because once I started pumping it, it started flowing well. So I think it's good now, and I can test it out. Definitely rolls easier. It seems like the clutch is fully releasing a little bit more than it was. Seems good. I like where it catches. And when I first start to pull the clutch lever, it actually just catches like right there. But I like where it starts to pull whenever I start to let off the clutch. So it's good. All is well. It's very comfortable clutch let out compared to stock with a fresh bleed and a new clutch line. So it's actually really good. I like it. I like it. It's a little bit smoother. Smoother is better, especially with shifting, and yeah. Anyway, that's all for this video. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and God bless you guys.